Okay, in today's video, what I'd like to do is I'd like to demo what a man-in-the-middle attack looks like. So I just want to start out with my Windows 7 machine and my Server 2003 machine. I just want to turn both of those on. It's also important that in this lab we know what IP addresses tie to which machines. It's going to be kind of confusing because we're going to have three different machines that we're working with. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write down my machines. So I've got my Windows 7. If I go to my Summary tab, I was hoping to see my IP address. Okay, so for my Server 2003, I see the IP address is 10.7.66.153. So I'm just going to make a quick note here saying 2003, and I'm just going to end with 153. And then I'm going to go back over to my Windows 7 here. And I'm going to open up my console. And I'm just going to go full screen. So I'm going to do my Control-Alt-Enter so I can see this good. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up my CMD, my command window. And I'm just going to type in ipconfig just to get this IP address. So for my Windows 7, it is going to end in 38. So I'm just going to type in win 7, and then I'm just going to 38. Okay, so I've got both of my IP addresses here for my Windows 7 and my 2003. So I don't know if you guys remember, but in a previous lab, we set up an FTP server, and the FTP server we set up was on our Server 2003. And then on our Windows 7, we should have FileZilla installed. So you should be able to find FileZilla installed somewhere. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to connect from my Windows 7 to my Server 2003. So before we go any further, we just need to make sure what we previously did is still functioning correctly. So the IP address is that 10.7.66, and my Server 2003 ends in 153. So I need to have that IP address. So you're going to use your own Server 2003's IP address. In that lab, I'm pretty sure I used WebDev, short for web developer, and the password I believe was like Tor, T-O-O-R, and the port was 21, and I'm going to click on my Quick Connect. So I can see that I can connect up to my server. Everything looks great. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to minimize this for now. So we talked from the Windows 7 to the Server 2003. The 2003 got our connection request and responded back with like a directory listing back to our Windows 7. Okay, so we've had a two-way conversation that worked well. So I've got my Tiger box. Now my Tiger box is interesting because that has multiple operating systems on it. I want to boot into the Windows operating system of my Tiger box. By default, the Tiger box will boot into Kali Linux. So I'm just going to right click and open the console before I power it on. And the reason is I don't want it to automatically boot into Linux. I want to boot into Windows. So I'm just going to power it on. And I need to make sure when the menu pops up, I click in this black area here. I want the focus to be inside here. And then I'm just going to hit my down arrow key. So as soon as I hit my down arrow key, it'll automatically go down to my Windows. If you missed it, it'll go into Kali like this. And I'm just going to do that because I'm assuming that a few of you probably didn't click in there or didn't get to the down arrow fast enough. And it does go fast, so. Okay, so if you get to this screen, all you have to do is hit the power and do a restart, and it'll give you another attempt. And within a minute, I'll be able to do my down arrow key and get to my Windows partition. I don't know why it says Windows Vista, but it is what it is. So I'm hitting my Enter key, and I see that I'm booting up into Windows. Now, this is Windows 7 as well, but this is not the same Windows 7 that we were in before. Right now, if you look up here, I see my Tiger box, and over on this one here, I see Windows 7. So Tiger box is going to be the hacker. And what I'm going to end up doing is, what I'd like to do is have the Windows 7 communication go to the Tiger box, have the Tiger box pass that information over to the server 2003. 2003 is going to respond back thinking it's talking to the Windows 7, but it's going to go to the Tiger box, and then the Tiger box is going to pass that information to the Windows 7. So that's the goal here with the man in the middle. So our Tiger box, we're going to wedge the Tiger box in between these two people as they were talking. So I'm going back over to my Tiger box, and I'm going to do a Control-Alt insert, and I'm going to connect up with the student. So the first thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to connect to an ISO. And the ISO that I want to connect up to is FTP software. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get Wireshark, and I believe that's in the FTP software. Okay, so I do see Wireshark here. So I connected up to the FTP software, and I'm just going to grab that Wireshark, and I'm just going to install Wireshark. So Wireshark was our packet sniffer. And I'm just clicking next and clicking install. I'm just going through taking the default connection here. And it's going to want me to install that WinPCAP. I'm just going to go through and install everything. And I'm actually going to run the Wireshark. So for Wireshark, I'm going to click on my network adapter, click the start button, and now this is going to start to sniff packets on our network. So I'm just going to filter for the TCP dot port, P-O-R-T, and I'm going to make that equal 21, and then I'm going to hit the enter key. So now I'm only seeing data that would be transmitted over port 21. So the Tiger box is going to start sniffing traffic, trying to find usernames and passwords. So I'm going to go back over to my Windows 7 machine where I had FileZilla, and I'm going to click on that Quick Connect again. And I can see that I connected up, and the directory listing was successful. So we made our FTP connection, but yet over here we're not seeing that. And the reason we're not seeing that is because the traffic is going through a switched network. And a switched network is different than like a hub. A switch will route traffic based on like the MAC addresses and who it's intended for. So it's a little bit smarter. It's got intelligence. Now, previous to switches, hubs really were what people used many years ago, and they were a disaster. I mean, it was like a lot of traffic getting thrown around everywhere. Everyone got everybody's traffic, and then 90% of the traffic you received you just disregarded. So a hub just spewed that traffic everywhere. So with a Wireshark during that time, with a hub, you'd see everything. Now with a switched network, we're not seeing any of the traffic because it's not coming to us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tool called CANenable. And we're going to use CANenable to sniff the appropriate traffic. And not to sniff it, but to actually redirect it. So before I do that, I'm just going to close down my Wireshark. And I'm going to quit without saving. And it's important that you don't install CANenable while your Wireshark is up and running. So the next thing I'm going to do is I need to disconnect my CD here. Okay, so now I've disconnected the one CD on the Tiger box. Now I'm going to connect to an ISO image on the data store. And I'm still inside the tools directory. This time what I want to do is I want to see if I can find Kane Enable. So I see Kane Enable. So this is going to be the software that we're going to use to basically create the man-in-the-middle attack. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm just going to run through the installer. Just going to go full screen here for a minute. Okay, so I'm just going to go next. I'm going to use the defaults. Everything's default here. PCAP installation. Warning, this uses PCAP. Do you want to install? I'm not going to install the PCAP driver because I already have it. So I'm just going to say don't install. Okay, so at this point, Kane Enable is here. So what I want to do is I want to wedge myself in between my two other machines. So I'm the Tiger box, I'm the hacker. So at this point, I'm just going to open up Kane. Okay, so it's warning me, saying my firewall is enabled and some features will not work correctly. So I'm going to say OK. So what I want to do is, before I get too deep into Kane Enable, I want to deal with the firewall issue. So what basically Kane Enable is going to do is it is going to sniff the network looking for physical MAC addresses and IP addresses. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this tool to send out incorrect ARP. And ARP is Address Translation Protocol. And basically the ARP protocol, just every time like I buy a new printer and I plug it into my network, the printer, if it's a network enabled printer, starts to spew out ARP traffic. And it doesn't actually spew it out, but it does broadcast, you know, hey, here I am, here's my hardware address, here's my IP address, you know. And then all the computers on the network will get that ARP traffic and then it'll add that information into the route table. So the route table will keep track of, you know, who is who and where it is and how it physically is located. So if I wanted to print and I select my printer, basically I send that information out to the router and the router will then traffic my request based on the MAC address to the correct piece of hardware. So Kane will take advantage of the fact that we're using trust. So ARP is assuming that that everybody's being honest and it's updating the routing table correctly. So what we're going to do is this tool is going to lie and it's going to say, oh yeah, your server 2003, it's my MAC address, and vice versa. So that way when the Windows 7 tries talking to the 2003, it actually is going to come to our computer. So we're going to route the traffic to us. And then Kane's going to act as a proxy, basically grabbing that packet, reading it of course, and then throwing it over to the server 2003. The 2003 is also a victim of this ARP poisoning, so it's going to think that it came from the Windows 7 machine, as it would have normally done. And when it responds back, it thinks it's responding back to the Windows 7 machine, but because it's a victim of the poisoning, the packet will come to our Tiger box, which then we can read the response and then pass it over to the Windows 7 machine as you would expect it to. So the reason that I need to turn off my firewall is because I don't know when somebody's going to make a request. So anytime the user is going to connect up to the server 2003, I need to basically accept that packet coming in. So what a firewall does is it blocks non-solicited traffic. So if somebody starts just talking to me, my firewall protects me so I don't even have to hear them. Once I make an outbound request saying, hey Google, what do you know about cars? I've actually solicited traffic from Google, and then Google can respond back to my solicitation. So that's the way firewall works. So if it's non-solicited, if somebody just tries talking to me, don't even know what's going on. But once I start talking, then it can respond back. Well, for the man in the middle, for that to work, we need to accept non-solicited traffic. So at some point, somebody with the Windows 7 machine is going to make an FTP connection, and they're going to connect to us. So I'm just going to turn my firewall off to make sure the hack will work correctly. So I'm going to click on my Start button, and I'm going to go over to my Control Panel. And within my control panel, I've got my security area. So I'm going to go to System and Security. And over here, I've got my firewall. So right now, they're both up and going. So I'm just going to turn firewall on or off. And I'm just going to turn both of these off. And it's going to make it red and tell me I'm in danger. Okay, so now we can accept non-solicited traffic. So the way that Kane works is it's kind of a cumbersome interface. It's not the world's easiest program to use. So with Kane, the very first thing I need to do is this button here, Stop Start Sniffer. I need to click that. The first time I click it, it's going to give me a warning, and I'm just going to say OK. It may have popped up a configuration, which I would have somewhat expected it to pop open a window like that. So the first time I click on it, I need to select my network adapter and click OK. And basically, my goal is to get it so that way it's pressed in. Okay, so you see how that's kind of pushed in 3D. So at this point, my sniffer's up and running. So life is good here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my sniffer tab. Okay, so I've got a tab here. Now you may have stuff in here, you may not. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove all. So my sniffer area now is blank. Underneath the sniffer tab, if I look straight up, I have a blue arrow or a blue plus symbol. I'm just going to click on the blue plus symbol, and I'm going to select all hosts on my subnet. So I'm going to click OK, and basically I'm just going to refresh that list. So now that's everybody whose machine's up and their MAC addresses. So now what I need to do is I need to pick out my server 2003. So my server 2003, I wrote it down earlier, ends in 153. So you're going to have to find yours, but I'm just going to scroll down until I see 153. There it is. Okay, so that one's there and going. And I'm also going to have to make sure 38 is in that list. And 38 is there as well. Okay, so both of them are up and going, which is good. So now what I want to do is I want to go over to this ARP tab at the bottom. And then within the ARP tab, I'm going to click in this upper area, and I'm going to click on the plus symbol again. So I clicked right here, click on the plus symbol, and now I need to find my server 2003. My server 2003 definitely was on the list. I saw it. It was 153. So I'm going to click on my 153. And now over here, I want to find my Windows 7, which is 38. And I also know that one was on the list. So I'm going to go to my 38. So I clicked on my 153, then I clicked on my 38. So I did my server 2003, and then I did my Windows 7. And to be honest, I could have done them vice versa. It doesn't matter. As long as I'm wedged in between those two, life is good. So I'm going to click on OK, and it's going to set up my area here. And basically, I can see that here's my IP address, here's the IP address, here's the MAC addresses. And what I want to do is I want to click on this toxic symbol here, which is going to start my ARP poisoning. So if I click on this, at this point, I'm now poisoning the network. So I'm spewing incorrect data between both of those machines. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to minimize my Kane, and I am going to open up my Wireshark. click my network adapter and say start. Okay, so I'm seeing traffic here. I'm going to type in TCP dot port equals 21, and I'm going to press enter. So at this point, I'm doing the same thing I did before, but now I'm doing some ARP poisoning between my Server 2003 and between my Windows 7. So I'm just going to bring this out of the way, and then I'm going to go back over to my Windows 7 machine again. On my Windows 7 machine, I'm just going to see if I can pull this so that way I can see both these screens. I know it's kind of large here, but... So at this point, I'm just going to do my quick connect again, and I'm going to abort the previous connection and say OK. And now it's doing the connection, and I can see that over here I'm connected, I can do whatever I want on the server. But over here, the Tiger box, which previously we didn't see, we now do see. So I'm seeing all of that traffic. So I see that I've got my password is required, it's webdev, the password is Tor. So at this point, we were successful in doing this man-in-the-middle attack. So we were able to do a man-in-the-middle using Kane-enable. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of set this up so I can get this and this. And I am going to take a screenshot. So I'm going to go to my WordPad. And I'm actually going to minimize the WordPad. And I'm going to actually do a full screen print. So I'm just going to press my Alt print screen so I get both windows. I have to click on my desktop to make sure I'm grabbing the entire desktop print screen. And then over here, I'm just going to paste this. So that way I can see that I've done a man-in-the-middle attack. So we were successful with this lab. So at the bottom of the lab, write a short paragraph describing the dangers of using the internet on a public network. All right, I could have a whole conversation on this. I see so many people using public servers, and even at the college, I mean, people are using the lab computers. It's somewhat of a hostile environment. So you need to always make sure that you're using your internet safe. So I never use public kiosks. I don't like using any public networks. I go to conferences and they've got computer labs where people can check their email. I'm always seeing people logging in. It's dangerous on so many different levels. People could have keyloggers installed. They could have, man-in-the-middle attacks going on. So it's always a little bit concerning when I'm on a hotel network, when I'm in a public place, even at the college using this student lab. I always restart my computer as soon as I walk into the classroom, just in case somebody installed something and they logged out. If I were to just log in, what they installed would probably still be running, especially if I'm logging in with student. Student is my username and password. So I always try to avoid that. What are some options that you could do from preventing somebody from accessing your system? Well, a VPN is the best. That really is your best line of defense. So in the real world, we wedged ourselves between an FTP server and a Server 2003. In the real world, what we're going to really be running into is somebody going into a coffee shop. They're sitting in the corner. They've got their machine open. They're using a man-in-the-middle attack. And instead of using you in Facebook, what they're going to do is you in the outbound gateway. So if you're sitting at Starbucks with your laptop open and you start surfing Facebook, MySpace, whatever, YouTube, Twitter, all that traffic is going from your computer to the outbound gateway. The outbound gateway then goes to Twitter, and then from Twitter back to the outbound gateway. The outbound gateway then is going to redirect it to the hacker sitting in the corner of the shop, and then he's going to read all your tweets and stuff like that, and then it's going to eventually come back to you. And you probably won't even realize it. You're just sitting there. If you were to wrap everything in an encrypted VPN connection, that's the best. So my router at home allows me to use OpenVPN. So I can actually, from a coffee shop, VPN into my home network, And then from there, my biggest concern is going to be my wife or one of my kids sniffing my packets. All right, so I'm not too worried about that. My home network is just like I'm sitting at home surfing the web. So that's definitely more secure than me sitting at a coffee shop or in a hotel lobby surfing the web. So just be careful where you do. So yeah, VPN and SSH are going to be your friends here. If we were to do the same lab again, matter of fact, we can. And since I'm right here, I'll just switch this to port 22. And if I were to switch this to port 22, because we did that in a previous lab, so now we're going through and we're making our encrypted connection, and I'm now connected up. Life is good. Over here, I get a lot more traffic in my packet sniffer, but I can definitely see that everything is encrypted. And I see I've got my SYNAC. I'm using OpenSSH. I can see that I'm doing a Diffie-Hellman key exchange. And now everything that I'm receiving is just an encrypted packet. So using any type of encryption is going to prevent somebody from stealing your data. So encryption definitely is your friend. So anyways, hopefully you found this lab useful.